It was a Tuesday morning in late October when I found my daughter-in-law collapsed on the front porch of my house in Mississauga. I had just come back from No Frills with 2 bags of groceries, butternut squash, some canned tomatoes, a rotisserie chicken I'd picked up because my knees were aching and I didn't feel like cooking from scratch. The sky was that pale gray that settles over Ontario in autumn and doesn't leave until April. I was thinking about nothing in particular, whether I'd remembered to buy bay leaves, whether my sister had called back yet, and then I saw her. My son's wife, I'll call her Abina, was crumpled against the doorframe, her coat open, one shoe half off her foot. She was conscious, but barely. Her lip was split. Her left eye was already swelling shut. I dropped the bags right there on the walkway. The chicken rolled out. I didn't care. Abina, Abina, look at me. She tried to lift her head and winced. When she finally focused on my face, she grabbed my wrist so hard I thought she'd leave bruises. It was them, she whispered. It was Nora. She said my blood was going to poison the family. I didn't fully understand what she meant. Not yet. I just got her inside. My son Theo had married Abina 3 years earlier in a small ceremony at a community hall in Brampton. She was Ghanaian Canadian, born in Accra, raised in Toronto. She was a registered nurse. She was kind in a way that some people mistake for weakness, and she loved my son with a patience I'd never quite managed myself. His father's family, my ex-husband's side, had never accepted her. I want to be clear about that from the beginning. This was not a misunderstanding that built over time. From the moment Theo brought Abena to the first Christmas dinner, his Aunt Nora had made her position known. Not loudly. Nora never did anything loudly. She was the kind of woman who smiled while she twisted the knife. She seems lovely. Nora had said that first night, pulling me aside in the kitchen. But you know how these things go. Different worlds. I told her I didn't know what she meant and walked away. I should have said more. I've thought about that moment many times since. The years that followed were a slow accumulation of small cruelties. Abena's food was interesting. Her accent was commented on, always with a smile. When she and Theo announced they were expecting, Nora sent a card to my son's address, not to both of them, addressed only to Theodore. Abena never complained to me. She protected my son from the worst of it. She protected me too, I think. She didn't want to be the source of conflict. She just kept showing up. Kept bringing her jollof rice to family dinners that didn't deserve it, kept being gracious in rooms where people were quietly hoping she'd give up and leave. She was 7 months pregnant when they hurt her. I got her onto the couch, got a bag of frozen peas wrapped in a dish towel for her eye. My hands were shaking. I was 63 years old and I had raised 2 children and buried a husband and dealt with more than my share of hard things. But my hands were shaking. Where is Theo? A conference. Calgary. She swallowed. I didn't want to call him. He'd get on the first flight and I didn't want him to panic. The baby is fine. We're going to make sure of that, but I need you to tell me what happened. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking. The furnace clicked on. Nora called me yesterday, Abena said finally. She asked me to come to the house, said she had something of Theo's father's that she wanted to give us before the baby came. A family heirloom. I thought maybe she was trying. I wanted to believe that. I knew the house she meant. Nora lived in a large detached home in Oakville, left to her by my ex-husband's mother. The kind of house that has a name, practically. Old money and old grudges, both equally well maintained. When I got there, Abena continued, she wasn't alone. Her son Callum was there, and a woman I didn't recognize. They sat me down at the dining room table, and Nora slid a document across to me. Abena closed her eyes. It was some kind of agreement. She said Theo's inheritance, his grandmother's trust fund, it would be released to him when he turned 40, but only if the marriage met certain conditions. She said the family had consulted a lawyer. That's not legal, I said immediately. You can't. I know. I told her that. I told her it wasn't enforceable. Abena's jaw tightened. That's when things changed. Callum got up from his chair. He said I was exactly the problem, that I thought I could walk into their family and rewrite everything. He said, she stopped, pressed her lips together. Abena. He said the baby would have dirty blood, that the family line was being polluted. Those were his exact words. She finally looked at me. I got up to leave and he grabbed my arm. I tried to pull away. I fell against the corner of the credenza. Nora just stood there. She watched the whole thing and she just stood there. I sat very still on the edge of the coffee table. I thought about the rotisserie chicken still sitting on the front walkway. I thought about Abena driving 40 minutes in that condition rather than calling an ambulance because she didn't want to make things worse. I thought about my son in Calgary presenting at a conference completely unaware. Something settled in me. Not rage. I'm past the age of rage. Something older and colder and much more deliberate. Okay, I said. First we go to the hospital. Then we file a report. Then you and I are going to have a longer conversation. Abena had 2 bruised ribs, significant bruising along her left arm, and a laceration above her eyebrow that required 4 stitches. The baby was fine, heart rate strong, no signs of distress. The emergency physician was thorough and gentle and asked the right questions. The nurse who took Abena's statement was a young woman who held Abena's hand without being asked. A police report was filed that night. I sat in the waiting area and called my brother Frank. Frank is 68. He retired 3 years ago from 30 years as a Crown Attorney with the Ministry of the Attorney General in Ontario. He lives in Hamilton with his wife of 40 years, and he has never once in his life done anything impulsively, which is exactly why I needed to talk to him. Tell me everything, he said. Don't leave anything out. I told him everything. When I finished, there was a pause. Physical assault on a pregnant woman, he said. That's not nothing, Evelyn. Depending on the extent of the injuries and what the report captures, we could be looking at aggravated assault charges. The racial component may also trigger additional considerations under the criminal code. What about the document? The one about the trust? Send me a photo if she has a copy. But what you're describing, attaching conditions to an inheritance based on the ethnicity of a spouse, that's not only unenforceable, it could constitute discriminatory conduct under the Ontario Human Rights Code. The question is whether there's enough documentation. Frank, I said, I need to know how bad we can make this for them. Another pause. Longer this time. Evelyn, he said carefully, I'm a retired lawyer, not a vigilante. I know. That's why I called you instead of driving to Oakville myself. He made a sound that in 40 years of being my brother, I had come to recognize as a reluctant laugh. Get some sleep. Bring her to stay with you tonight. Don't let Theo fly back until you've spoken to him properly, not just in a panic. And tomorrow morning, call me again. I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table after Abena was settled in the spare room, and I went through everything I could remember from the past 3 years. Every dinner. Every comment, every time I had bitten my tongue because I thought the best approach was patience. I keep a journal, have since my 40s. Nothing elaborate, just a spiral notebook where I write down things that happen, how I feel about them, what I wish I'd said. I went back through 2 years of entries and I found more than I expected. Specific dates, specific words. A birthday party in July 2024 where Nora had told Abena, within my earshot, that mixed children always struggle with identity. It's nobody's fault, just the reality. I had written it down that same night because it had bothered me and I hadn't known what to do with it. By 3 a.m, I had 6 pages of notes. Dates, incidents, witnesses. I texted Frank a photo of the 6 pages. He replied at 7 the next morning. This is actually very useful. Call me at 9. I called Theo at 8. I will not pretend that conversation was easy. He is my son and he had been kept in the dark, partly by Abena's protectiveness and partly by his own. I think he knew things were not right with his father's family, but knowing and accepting are different things, and he had chosen, for the sake of peace, not to press too hard on the edges. When I told him what had happened, he was silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. "Mom, she's okay. The baby's okay. She's here with me. I'm getting on a plane. I know, but listen to me first." And I told him what Frank had said. I told him about the journal entries. I told him that we had options, but only if we were careful and coordinated, and that showing up in Oakville in a fury would burn those options down before we'd use them. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying let me and Frank handle the first steps. Give us 72 hours. He flew home that afternoon anyway. I hadn't expected otherwise, but he agreed to wait. What followed was not dramatic. That is the part that people who have only watched things unfold in movies don't quite understand. Real justice, when it actually arrives, tends to be procedural. It is phone calls and documents in waiting rooms and language you have to look up. Frank connected us with a colleague of his, a woman named, I'll call her the family's lawyer because she deserves her privacy, who specialized in civil litigation and human rights complaints. Abena gave a full recorded statement. The 4 stitches and the 2 bruised ribs were photographed and documented. The hospital report was obtained. Callum was charged with assault causing bodily harm. Because Abena was visibly pregnant at the time of the assault, the Crown considered aggravated assault. The case was still being evaluated on that point when I last spoke to our lawyer. The document Nora had presented, her so-called family agreement, was reviewed. It was, as Frank had suspected, unenforceable, and the process of having it formally declared so also generated a paper trail that was deeply uncomfortable for Nora's legal position. The Ontario Human Rights Tribunal complaint was filed in November. These things move slowly. I want to be honest about that. Nobody in a waiting room handed us a victory in an envelope. But here is what happened in the meantime. Theo's grandmother's trust, the actual trust, the original legal document, was reviewed by an independent estate lawyer. Nora, as it turned out, had been the informal administrator of certain assets held in trust for Theo since his father's death in 2019. A proper accounting revealed discrepancies. Not enormous ones, but significant. The estate lawyer used the word commingling. Frank used a different word, privately, when he called to tell me. That piece of information changed the nature of the situation considerably. Nora had spent 3 years telling her family that Abena was a threat to their legacy. What the document showed was that the threat had been sitting in Nora's own bank records the whole time. By the time Abena gave birth, a girl, healthy and loud, born in February at Trillium Health Partners, the criminal charge against Callum was proceeding through the courts. The human rights complaint had been formally accepted, and Nora had retained a very expensive lawyer, which Frank told me was usually a sign that someone understood exactly how serious their situation was. We named the baby, well, Theo and Abena named her. I was not consulted, and correctly so, but they told me the name before they told anyone else. Her middle name is the name of Abena's grandmother, a woman who raised 8 children in Accra and lived to 94 and never once, Abena had told me, believed that her family was anything other than exactly what it should be. I held that baby in the hospital room on a Wednesday afternoon with the February light coming in flat and pale through the window, and I thought about a Tuesday morning in October when I had dropped my groceries on the front walkway and not known yet how the next 4 months would go. I thought about the journal in my kitchen drawer. I thought about the 6 pages of notes. I thought about Nora standing at her dining room table, watching, not moving. She had believed, I think, that silence made her safe, that she could stand in the room while harm was done and keep her hands clean, that her name on an old trust document meant her position was permanent. She had miscalculated on every count. My brother Frank called me that same evening while I was driving home from the hospital. "How is she?" "Perfect," I said. "Both of them perfect." "Good." A pause. "I spoke to the estate lawyer today. There may be additional findings. I don't want to say more than that yet." "Okay, Evelyn, you did the right things, in the right order." I know it didn't feel like enough at the time. I watched the 427 stretch out ahead of me, the headlights of 100 other people all going somewhere, all carrying their own particular weight. It wasn't enough, I said. Not entirely. But it was what we had. That's usually how it works, he said. I want to say one more thing for anyone who is listening to this and recognizing something in it. Abena never asked me to fight for her. She would have handled it herself, eventually, in her own way. She is not a woman who needs rescuing, but she was pregnant and alone, and she had driven 40 minutes to my front porch because somewhere in her she still trusted that I was the kind of mother-in-law who would open the door. I think about that she came to me. If you are in a family where someone is being told, quietly, smilingly, repeatedly, that they do not belong, that their presence is a contamination, that love itself can be sorted by bloodline, do not wait for a credenza. Do not wait for a hospital report. Start your journal tonight. Write down the dates and the words and the names of the people who were in the room, because silence is not neutrality. I stood in too many kitchens for too many years believing that keeping the peace was the same as keeping the family together. It is not. I know that now. The baby is well. Her mother is well. My son is home. And somewhere in Oakville, in a large house with a name and very well-maintained grudges, Nora is waiting for a phone call from a very expensive lawyer. I hope she is thinking about what she watched from across that dining room table. I hope she thinks about it for a long time. I have been thinking these past few months about how quietly things can go wrong inside a family. Not the loud, obvious kind of wrong, the kind you can point to and say, there, that is the moment. I mean the other kind, the kind that accumulates in dining rooms and Christmas kitchens, in cards addressed to only one name, and smiles that never quite reach the eyes. Nora didn't become who she was overnight, and neither did the harm she caused. What I keep coming back to is this. Callum put his hands on a pregnant woman and felt entitled to do it. He felt entitled because for 3 years, nobody had stalked anything. Not the comments, not the document. Not the document. Not the comments. Doc the document. Not the watching. Cruelty that goes unanswered doesn't stay the same size. It grows confident. It starts to believe it has permission. That is the thing about doing nothing. It looks like neutrality, but it isn't. Every time I held my tongue at a family dinner, every time I told myself it wasn't my place, I was casting a vote. I just didn't know it at the time. Abena drove 40 minutes to my front porch because she needed somewhere to go. She didn't ask me to fight. She just needed a door to open. And I have thought many times since about what would have happened if I had been the kind of woman who kept the peace at any cost, who said, let's not make this bigger than it is. Let's wait and see. She would have handled it alone. She would have managed because she is the kind of person who manages. But she would have learned in the process that she was alone in a family that should have been hers. I didn't want her to learn that. I didn't want my granddaughter to be born into a family where that was true. So you do what you can in the order you can do it. You get the person inside. You get the ice. You make the call you should have made years earlier. To the brother who knows what questions to ask, you find the journal you've been keeping without quite knowing why, and you discover that the truth has been sitting there in your own handwriting, dated and specific and patient, waiting for the moment it would be needed. Integrity is not a dramatic thing. It doesn't announce itself. It's the habit of writing things down, of asking the next question, of not letting a smile be the end of a conversation that deserved a harder one. Nora built her position on the assumption that silence meant agreement. She was wrong, but she was wrong because people like me let her believe it for too long. What I want to say to anyone carrying something similar is this: the accounting always comes. Not because the universe is keeping score in any mystical sense, but because actions have consequences that compound the same way cruelty does, the same way silence does, the same way a 2-year journal of specific dates and exact words does. What you build, quietly, in the right direction, becomes the thing that holds when everything else comes apart. Theo is home. Abena is well. The baby is asleep in a crib in Mississauga. And I am 63 years old, and I am still learning that opening a door is never a small thing.